a wild time. Can't even believe it. Today is Wednesday, March 29th, and we are in the absolute throes of WGI season. I saw the color guard schedule just got announced. That means all the seeding and the scores and the regionals are over, and everyone's ready for WGI World Championships in Dayton. This is such a crazy time of year. For those of us like myself that work full time, I'm working in a normal job, 40 hours a week. And then I put in about 32-ish hours over the weekend with Mason, obviously, not including driving. This weekend I'm driving to Virginia Beach, which is going to be about 6 hours each way. So it's a real slog doing this. As amazing and as sort of like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, you work with Independent World Group and that must be like the most luxurious thing. And at times it absolutely is. I work with like the most talented members and staff members that you can, but I also am getting my ass beat just in the grind of everything. And people don't realize that's what this is about. And the people that can outlast that grind are the ones that you see stick around. The person we're interviewing today very much falls under the umbrella of not only, kind of weathering what it requires to succeed in the marching arts, but living that life like no one else does. Like this person really, really embraces and succeeds, whether it be under pressure, whether it be under high stakes environment, doesn't matter. This person is like clutch. This is a dude that I go back with, we marched together at Rhythm X 2012, like shout out to that whole group because it was a crazy year. Super fun year. But for anyone who knows and was there, it's like kind of a hallmark year in terms of Rhythm X turning the corner into who they eventually became. This person we're interviewing was such a part of not only the culture of success at Rhythm X around the 2013-14 area, but as well just in bass drumming culture around this time. Like when I think about the years like 11, 12, 13, and 14, it feels like bass drumming took this like massive evolutionary spike. And I 100% give this person all the credit in the world for that, even though he is going to disagree. I don't care. I get to talk because it's my podcast. So today's guest is an active designer, educator, and enthusiast for the marching arts. He currently serves as a director of percussion at Kettering Fairmount High School. Shout out. He also serves as the battery coordinator for the Bluecoats Drum and Bugle Corps. He has a decade at the very least of working with, designing, and teaching for some of the most high caliber ensembles in the world. Originally from St. Louis, our guest currently lives in Dayton, Ohio. Also shout out Dayton with his wife and 3 bulldogs. Everyone help me welcome my good friend, Tommy Rome. What is up? How we doing?
Hello, Dan. Thanks for having me, bud.
I've been trying to get you on here. I've been doing this for couple years now, and it's just like we're always catching up on the phone. We're always like talking shit and just like what's going on over here, what's going on over there, and it's just like it was time, like let's get on here and do like a formal interview.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do it, man.
Dude, so what's going on in your life? Like obviously you're doing the Kettering thing and you are in there just like busting ass, just like totally grinding it out. Like what's the vibe inside the Kettering program? Like how's it going this year compared to last year? Like what changes have you made? Like I taught there with you with previous kind of reigns at Kettering. Like what's the deal with this year?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, Dan. Well, right now we're in the middle of spring break and I'm just at the school doing some spring cleaning, if you will.
Yeah.
But I like to think of where we're at right now as kind of just, a course of the last 5 or 6 years that I've been at Kettering. And I think each year we've just been trying to make sure that the program gets better in any way that it can, the things that we can improve on and just making a better experience for the kids. But right now, things are great. After last season, which was kind of our first attempt back in the open class, was like a huge wake up call for us. But it was also just like a great opportunity to look at this year, which, was next year then. But it was a great opportunity to look at the future and just kind of decide what kind of group we want to be. And so there's just been a lot of preparation and planning that goes into everything. Like we got a really early start. We've been very open with communication with our design team and our staff and the students for that matter. And everybody's just very on board right now. So things are good. Pressure's a little high. We had a pretty great weekend at the Dayton Regional 2 weekends ago. But again, that was just kind of a surprise, really. Like we're just doing our thing and we just keep doing what we know how to do. And we had a great weekend. But yeah, other than that, it's just kind of the same grind outside of the indoor drumline thing. I actually spent a lot of time doing like middle school percussion. That's like a lot of my work, I think, goes into those places. And that's all what feeds into the indoor program and stuff. So it's kind of funny where I feel like I do more of the concert percussion and middle school stuff than I actually do with the indoor drumline. And the more of those kind of things I can set up, the more, it feeds into these other things, or whether that's like athletic bands or the other concert bands, indoor drumline, all the different programs you have. So hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, it does. So who is teaching there these days for kind of the indoor group? Because I know that you kind of have a team around you, and I know some of the dudes that have been there. Who is currently kind of on the roster teaching the group?
Sure. Right now, our design team is Jeremy Jorgensen. He's our visual designer, and Andrew Markworth is our music designer. Andrew's been here since the beginning. I started working here at Kettering in 2017, and I hired him on to work with me, and he's been here since, and he's amazing. Jeremy Jorgensen, I think this is his third indoor drumline show with us doing the visual program. He's amazing too. We also have Frank Cummings and JJ Frederico. They serve on the design team with us, and they're just so like fresh with all their ideas and things like that. So they help with kind of aiding in choreography or where the show's going. After that, we've got like a handful of staff members, awesome people that are really dedicated to the program. Stu Levan, Hunter Mays, Jordan Howerton. Who else do we have? Mason Ferrantelli for the cymbal line. We've got Michael Ham for the front ensemble. Brian Ricker for the front ensemble. So there's a lot of amazing people that I'm lucky to work with every day.
Super dope. And yeah, having the designers that have been around, because we obviously work with Jeremy at Cap City, and you work with him at JJ Viz Designs, and Andrew has just like, storied history in the area. I think you were there. I met JJ. Shout out JJ, obviously shout out Frankie, and shout out his baby truck. But I remember meeting JJ, and I was like, he was like, I marched Cap City. I was like, yeah, you got a Cap City haircut. He had like the buzz side with the floop, with the floopy top. But dude, that's super dope. And man, so the middle school thing is like such a differentiator when I look at a program like Dartmouth, for example, or and actually I don't know about Chino Hills. Maybe you know more about that than I do, because I imagine you're talking to people about what they do. But the middle school thing has to be like the most important kind of aspect of building the program at the high school level. So are you like in every middle school like band class? Are you given like private lessons? Like kind of what's your relationship with like building the middle schools as a pipeline into the competitive like high school groups?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we offer a handful of different opportunities and programs for our middle school students and high school students, but I go into the middle school 3 days a week. And right now we have Frank Cummings going to our other middle school. We have two middle schools that feed into Kettering, Kettering Middle School and Van Buren Middle School. And we both kind of just divvy that up so where we can have the same type of focus and attention on either school or either program. But we go in 3 days a week. We definitely give lessons to those that are interested in doing it. We encourage all of those opportunities for sure. But yeah, it's really funny. It's like, it's always this never ending cycle of like, the things we can always improve on in the middle school, and you do those things. And then you get to the high school and you kind of see the aftermath of that and what's great, but then you also still see the things that aren't working. So it's always this like cycle of like, okay, now go back, and like the standard keeps getting higher and higher for the middle school and the high school stuff and the indoor drumline. So, but yeah, that's kind of our involvement, just doing the 3 days a week and lessons and stuff. We really try to focus on like percussion fundamentals with them. So like at both middle schools, we have like separate rooms that we can take our percussion students out, whether we're just taking out individuals or sections, or maybe it's all based on mallet focus or anything like that. We kind of take everybody out, or we'll be in full band with the full concert band. And just, I guess, being like a director here at the school, sometimes they ask me to do other things like, hey, Tommy, I need you to make copies of this, or hey, can you work on the rhythms with the trombones here, those kind of things. But yeah, I think that's about it as far as our involvement with the middle school kids.
Are you training a lot of like rudimental drumming, or is it more like rhythmic concepts, reading music, like playing across the spectrum of percussion instruments, or also you like, this is a, full down tap up, paradiddles, paradiddle diddles, hybrid rudiments? Like, are you focusing like particularly in like the marching side, or does that kind of come naturally within like the flow of their education?
That's a great way to put it. Like just naturally, it all kind of feeds into each other. I
Yeah.
think step one is making sure that we're teaching our kids fundamentals and like holding a stick versus holding a mallet. You know what I mean? Because there's such a difference between the two, other than like reading and rhythms and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. We also have like an eighth grade night where it's kind of like this crescendo into the athletic side of things, like rudiments and those kind of like athletic percussion. But as far as answer the question about like rudiments and how we separate those two things, I will say during the middle school classes, it's very based on like we've got our percussive arts society poster with all 40 rudiments and stuff like that. And so you work on like paradiddles and it'll be in a much different setting, right? Like it's not like athletic, super aggressive downstrokes and all that, where they are learning downstrokes and upstrokes, but it, like you said, it's kind of a flow into those things. So like we teach more of the concert approach with like playing those different rudiments, buzz rolls, 5-stroke rolls, 9-stroke rolls, all that kind of stuff is super, super important. But like you said, it all kind of feeds into it eventually. Where like when they get into eighth grade and now we're learning the fight song and we're learning those rudiments for like high velocity marching percussion. Well,
Yeah.
then we can kind of just take those things we've already learned and it's like, hey, you remember those paradiddles we worked on? Kick the accents way up, get a very aggressive downstroke, hold the stick a little tighter, those kind of things. So it all really feeds into itself, but there is a slight progression of like start at the fundamentals, more concert percussion work, and then it kind of turns into the athletic stuff later.
Yeah, you're really smart with that stuff, because I know I've taught, high school and even younger, and like I was so locked into just like, this is exactly how you paradiddle. It's like this height to this height, and like this really particular way to do it. Because I really like kind of came up through like drum corps, right? Like this very specific inlet. I played drum set a lot up to that point, and then it kind of split off. And this is like a huge fault in how I at least grew through it all, was like, I'm going to become like a marching guy and like be a snare drummer through and through. And my drum set playing became like really stiff, really rudimental, really loud. I was constantly getting screamed at in jazz band for like overplaying the drums, not anyone teaching me how to like actually play with touch. Right. Are you still kind of working from a drum set angle? Because I know you personally are like an excellent drum set player and that you love to play drum set. Are you also teaching like the jazz side of things, or drum set fundamentals as well?
Yeah, definitely. More specific to drum set, a lot of those things happen in like individual private lessons. We've got a
Yeah.
handful of drum set players that study with me or our other lesson teachers. And then there's also the students that sign up for whether it's middle school or high school jazz band, and they learn from one of our other directors. And I help out as much as I can. Man, there's a lot to unpack there, because I'm with you. Like on the how do you apply all these different concepts, but simultaneously feed a program where everybody's learning to be versatile or use all these different
Right.
instruments. And I'll start with this. I personally have learned so much just being a teacher myself and doing all the wrong things too many times and learning from them. But I will say I've shed myself 10 times over, even in the last 5 years being here, where you're absolutely right, man. Like 4 years ago, maybe I had more of that aggressive marching or drum set approach, like play louder, yada, yada. But those things really don't help the concert side of things. You know what I mean? Like the way you approach a concert snare is so different than even just the snare drum on a drum set, right? So I will say I've learned a lot through all the trial and error there. But I also do think it's, not to sound high and mighty or anything, but like learning everything is just so important. And like,
Right.
there's no one way to do anything. And I know everybody knows that rule, but like, just trying to make sure that you're being open-minded all the time, and I know I'm not perfect either, but I've really been trying to make sure that the kids aren't limited in that way either. It's like, hey, I know you play drum set and you love to play jazz band, but now when we step over to a marimba and we play four mallets, or the way we get on a concert snare, or the way we play timpani, like, I really just try to make sure that everybody understands the very clear differences between the instruments, but I also make sure they know it's not the one way to do it. I always talk about like, when kids, like we just had a student get into the Wright State Percussion Studio like last week, which is great for him. And he's already learning from that professor there and like all these different ways. And I told him for years, you're going to learn from other people, it'll be different. But yeah, that's kind of how all that I think coincides and works together. So,
Dude, and I feel like thinking back to when we, we started together. I mean, obviously we marched together, but I was like very much a snare guy. I feel like I was like in the snare line. You were brand new. I was kind of like jock, whatever. So like we were all doing our thing, figuring out. It was cool. The group was solid. It was a little more like I think the group had a less like solid culture across sections that year than we did in 11. 11 was very like across the board. We were all like really cool. And like our situation was better. Shout out Kettering, because we rehearsed in that band room you're sitting next to, had a lot of fun doing it. It's like
Great.
amazing, such a great facility, like so many amazing memories like being in there. But I remember especially when we started at Connexus in 17, just like, and it's funny because you're like 4 years ago, I'd be more like kind of like regimented or restricted. But like what I remember about teaching with you was like you didn't have a lot of boundaries around like what you would address, whether it be writing drill or like addressing the mallet intonation and articulation or snare line clarity, or like obviously the bass drums. Like that's something I always found like you were kind of naturally attuned to, was like percussion is percussion. I'm not like afraid to like address the cymbals just because like I played bass drum for a while, right? And I think like something that's very specific to like marching percussion is like we put up a lot of walls between like the ideas, right? Like a lot of cymbal people and cultures around cymbal line are like, oh, you don't get it, you didn't march the cymbal line, right? You're over there. Oh, you don't get bass drumming because you never like ripped a bugada and a laser and a hand-to-hand at 200, or you don't get quads because it's like scrapes and arounds. And like I think that's a massive detriment to what we do, because I think that it kind of creates like different languages when like what we're doing is like so similar. Do you feel like that's kind of how you always were? Like I would argue, like at least in 2017 when we were like working together all the time, I was like, damn, this dude like really doesn't care to like I remember teaching Crown and just feeling like, oh, I'm not like allowed to teach the bass line because like the person teaching there, not the year you were there specifically, but the person that was kind of overseeing it like made me feel really boxed out. Or like that can happen, right? That you feel boxed out when you're in a coordinator position, you're in a design position. And it's like, this is too specific. You don't get it. You were this, so you'll never get this, right? Like, do you feel like that's something you like work towards? Are you like naturally more attuned to just like, this is drumming? Like, I don't really like see much of a difference.
Yeah. Wow. Great question, dude. That's awesome. I think the best way I could maybe put it into words is that it's all music. Like I know that sounds kind of hippy dippy or simple or whatever, but like when it comes down to it, it's all rhythms and tempo, or it's all about like clarity. And I think approach is super important. Like for me, I think as a teacher, it's always important that you're seeing your kids all attempting to have the same approach and do the same things the same way. And if you see a section that's not doing that, I mean, I kind of think of it as like, that's your chance, like seize the day, right? Like if I see a section and maybe one cymbal kid or one cymbal player is holding their mouth or their cymbals a little bit lower than the other, like if I don't say anything right now, okay, maybe the tech staff member will get it or something, or maybe they won't. And so it's just one of those things where you want to make sure you at least did try and say something about it, So I see it all as music, and like I think everybody on a team is just trying to help. You know what I mean? You don't hire anybody to like hurt the program or hurt the staff or anything like that. So I guess, I have been a little more open to just kind of everybody giving input. And I think there are boundaries, right? Like you don't want to go too far into someone else's section. Like you got to kind of read the room. If there's like a snare sectional happening and there's 12 snare guys and they're teaching, like I'm not going to say anything. You know what I mean? But I've just always looked at it as music. And I agree with you, man. I think it's huge. Like, I don't want to call it an issue or whatever, but I do think the percussion side of things, it does get like segmented where like, okay, you're a bass drum, you're whatever. But I don't know. I've always seen it all as percussion. And I like to think that everybody that does play a percussion instrument has like gone through some type of training on other instruments too. Like maybe it's just a little bit of mallets and they did a lot of marching snare drum, or maybe somebody did a lot of concert band and the only thing they did in the marching realm was like, quads, you know what I mean? But it's all the same story where I think it's just all music, and it can all be shaped and crafted in certain ways. And we all have different ears. That's a huge part. How we hear things is different than other people. So yeah, I think that's a part of the fun too. You know what I mean? Like we come in here to like hopefully inspire and teach and educate people. And if you see something that you think is worth talking about, like if it's worth it to you, I think it's worth saying to the rest of the group. So
yeah, dude, I love a lot of that. I love all of it. And something for me, like as I get I don't want to say pushed, but as I zoom out in these roles and like, being in the program role or whatever, I have very consciously tried to address sections that I am less comfortable addressing naturally. Like I am a career snare drummer. I marched 7 years of drum corps on snare. I did one season of bass in high school. And then I was on a snare drum forever. And like that's like my personality. Like, just as well as anyone, like I am a very like quintessential like snare dude. Right. So as I get into these roles, kind of like you're in this director role where you're like overseeing like so many different like verticals of percussion that it's like, yo, like I can teach a cymbal line. Like I know what I'm listening for. I know what I'm looking at. And I want them to feel like they're being taken care of from like my perspective and not just like the technical side. One thing that resonates with me is that I always felt like you put the work in from a hands and drumming standpoint. I have auditioned so many bass drummers at whether it be Crown or at Mason or whomever, and they're like in the line and it's like, okay, like 3 split, 4 splits, like, single split, whatever. They come in the individual. We're like, all right, play 8 bars of flam accents. And it is like, they're not drummers, right? You're a bass drummer in a bass line, even at a world-class level, but you can't drum. Same thing with quads, right? It's like, yo, playing this crazy around for when you march this other core. And now it's like, yo, play 8 and 8 triplet rolls on the 2 drum. And it is like they've never been asked to do that before. I think, in my opinion, like, and we've come up at a perfect time, right? And you were like such a climax of this moment, whereas like the hybrid part of bass drumming and quad drumming, like we get to 2012 Blue Coats and 2013 Rhythm X, like the hand-to-hand moment, like Tim Jackson's quad writing, like just, and like all these people, like I could go on and on about them. Like there was this huge rise in like the hybrid skills behind like quad drumming and snare drumming, of course, and all the different sections. And I think we're at a point where it's like, we need to come back, right? Where to be an excellent bass drummer, to be the highest level bass drummer, you have to be a pretty damn good snare drummer. Like if not, be able to make the snare line. Same thing with quads. I think cymbals is different because there are certain like aspects of like the physicality and like touch and all those things that are more technically specific. But I just feel like kids see what you were able to do in Rhythm X 2013 and they're like, I'm going to go like this, play the inside of a hand-to-hand, but they can't like produce quality just playing legato strokes. And it's like, let's like bring you back. Like, let's do that. So like, how do you respond to that? I feel like I'm blaming you for like this wave of like people not being like good drummers, but it was such a amazing moment in time. But I know how good you were playing any instrument, drum set, snare drum, quads, whatever it be. So like, what do we do? How do we rein it in so that the drumming qualities are still at like the essence of what we're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, to kind of bring it back to one of your other questions, I think this is where it all connects to the concert thing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it has to, but I think that's where programs and students are lucky to have the opportunity to try so many different instruments. Like, that's the beautiful thing about percussion, is that you're not just playing one instrument in concert band. But I think it kind of speaks for like the students' upbringing and education, where like I was lucky enough to have a lot of people that influenced me on drum set or influenced me on marching battery instruments. I played a lot of like snare, tenor, and bass drum when I was in high school. But maybe we didn't have as much of that concert influence. So like, of course I would be raised to be a little bit more on the athletic drumline side of things. But, I will say this, maybe this kind of answer the question too. My students right now that have really been studying more on the concert side of things, like I have students that are learning timpani solos. We've got our solo and ensemble event coming up, where I have like some of my marching, snare, or tenor drummers like learning a marimba piece, or I have some mallet percussionists learning like snare pieces and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'll say this right now, hopefully this answers your question, but this has helped the indoor and athletic thing so much more than I ever could just focusing on the marching thing, if that makes sense. It's just like, it just helps them get a better understanding, whether it's like physically like holding a stick, or it's just like the material they're playing. And like showing and exposing students to all these different types of literature and instruments, like that's everything. So if you have a student that is playing marching bass drum that can split everything on the planet, but maybe their sound quality is not as good, or their like their rudimental vocabulary is not as strong. Well, then they probably came from a place where they didn't have as much concert studies and all that, and they only practice bass drumming. You know what I mean? And that's not it's not a right or wrong way to do it. But I definitely am a believer in just like exposing the students to as many instruments and vocabulary, literature, all that stuff as possible. I think it does help getting into like the drum corps audition side of things. And I agree with you completely. Like, I think it is more about the person as a drummer. Like when you're auditioning for, let's say you're auditioning for any of these drum corps, it's snare, bass drum, or tenors, or even cymbals. Like you're still looking at them as a percussionist, regardless of the instrument that they're auditioning for. And it's just good to know, like, how's their subdivision? You know, how are their ears? Like, how are their recovery skills? Like, there's so many things that I think are much more important, because if you have those skill sets, you can craft them into like, okay, take this triplet you're playing and now play it a little bit later in between. You know what I mean? It's actually not rocket science anymore. So
it seems like it's not, and I really really like all that. And I think that as it's interesting because we have all this like access to these drum lines, right? Oh, Blue Coats 2022, like Fred Sanford winning drum line, like this is what they're playing, but you don't see how those members got there. Like I wish you could see like the child version of Tommy Rome and Blue Coats 2012 or whatever. Like you didn't just like get born that way. Like you took this time to like sweep your corners and almost go towards the areas of weakness. And I think that is like such an important part of when we came up through this activity that's missing now, is like the embracing discomfort or embracing the areas where you are not your best. Because I think a lot of students now are sort of they're led astray by the appearance versus the reality, right? The appearance is like, yeah, Blue Coats in finals, or like every DCI group in that top realm, like in finals, like are so good. But if you could see like a ticker of the hours that each of those members put in, like it takes so much digging, right? So I'd love to hear like just from your perspective, like obviously, you know, you did the Glassman thing. And did you march indoor before X?
just with my high school.
Yes. Yeah. You didn't march Freedom, right, in Missouri, but you were like teaching there a lot.
Yeah, I did some teaching and some designing for them, just because our high school directors, like, we're all tied into those things. But we had Gateway Indoor and Freedom Indoor when I was in high school. So yeah. I didn't march there, but I did have opportunities to go audition there when I was in high school. So yeah. But anyways, you were asking me something else. So
yeah, I would love to hear kind of your process. You know, obviously you're gonna have to boil it down because there's so many kind of like places you could go, but like your process going from like where you were maybe marching, you know, Glassman and sort of that point, and then like skip to like X14. Like in my opinion, my personal opinion, best Rhythm X drumline of all time, Rhythm X14. That's just me. Holistic. I'm not saying across the whole ensemble, but I would say like the marching drumline, I think it's the best. Sure. And just looking at even where you were around like that 12, 13 area where you were just so solid. And it was just like you had all the intangibles, like the drumming stuff was there, but like how did you become this person who was like such a reliable member on the floor, like innovative, like pushing the staff and the members? Because that doesn't just happen. Like, is this just something that you were like meant to do, meant to be, or like, how do you feel like you got to that place where it was like, you know, man in the arena, ripping that hand to hand, like changing the world?
Wow. Well, first, I'm super flattered, man. Thank you. I appreciate, like, it's just, you're being, there's lots of compliments. I really appreciate that. I don't see it that way. Like you're saying, you know, like I see so many amazing members nowadays. And from the time that I marched to now, like there's, you know, it's still happening. And I'm not like anybody separate from that. But I do think, if this answers your question, I do think that passion is everything. The passion that we have for music, the passion that we have for percussion, like just that investment, you know, and you know me on a personal level, like I'm just, I guess, more open with my feelings like that. And that whether it's how much I love band or working with the people that I trust, all those things. But yeah, the point that I'm getting at is like, I started just like anybody else, just like you or anybody else that really wanted to be a part of the activity. And I'm not talking about people that marched like these top 3 drum corps or whatever. I think what's worth noting is that I started just like anybody else. And I think from when I was, I don't know, 14, 13 years old to now, the one thing that still has not changed is just like my passion for wanting to learn more and just create music. You know what I mean? Like playing drums and playing music and time with people and sharing that pulse. And it's just such a magical thing. It's still just as exciting as it was when I was 13 years old. And so I don't think there's like, it's not a coincidence, or I think it is, it's not a coincidence in that when you see those kids that really stand out in your program, like they also happen to be like some of the most passionate kids about percussion studies and learning and playing music. You know what I mean? Like I think there is a correlation there, and it's not just a coincidence. So yeah, I remember sitting in my basement, like when I was a junior in high school, like staring at Blue Coats drumline videos. And I would, I didn't really have teachers that marched or did anything. I had a band director that marched Santa Clara Vanguard, and they like won a championship, and I don't even know when it was, but I had a little bit of his influence to kind of direct me and like, hey, this is how drum corps kind of works. But at the end of the day, I was just on YouTube, man. And that was before YouTube is a thing now. Like now you see YouTube and you can hear the clarity, and it's almost like you're literally there. But dude, I was doing all the same stuff. Like I was learning like Blue Coats Moeller or whatever back in the day when I was a kid. It was terrible. I'm just like hacking on a pad, and I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but I think that it's just all comes from your passion. You know what I mean? And like, there's no limitations to how far you can grow and develop and be a person. And as far as like the membership side of things, I think I just feel like I'm like being high and mighty right now, but like
you're not. This is your episode, and honestly, just remember, people have not heard you talk like that. I'm very lucky, but you can ramble on, bro, because people should listen to what you have to say because you've done it.
Sure. Okay. No, I don't know. I think with, it's all about just how much you care about it. And like I was saying, I don't think there's a ceiling or limitation. And I think a lot of people try to tell themselves they can't do it because of the stature, especially nowadays. Like going to audition for the Blue Coats now is probably not the same feeling as it was back then, or any of these drum corps. So like, you got to be even more courageous and outgoing to do it. And I think it's amazing to see what performers do nowadays, but I don't know, we're nothing without that passion. And I think students and people auditioning and all that, like, should know there's nothing stopping you from, being where you want to be. And as long as you have the heart and the passion for doing something, I think you can accomplish all of it. And we were talking about the member thing before I got sidetracked, but being a good member and all that, I think the most important thing is that you care about the group doing well. And if I could throw any kind of recommendation or any advice to young performers nowadays, it's like, you really have to zoom out in a perspective that at that age, you don't really have yet, or you're still kind of working on. Maybe some students have more of it and some don't, but trying to have that big picture awareness for like how much other people or staff members or designers are putting into the package, or what it takes to even field a group or schedule a group or get across the road. Like there's just so many things. And I think I always just understood that I knew I had one job, and that was to be great on the floor. And I was always trying to be as consistent as I could. And, I cared about it sounding great. And then there was like loading the truck and doing all that kind of stuff. Everybody hates doing it, but I tried my best in like filling in those areas too. Cause it's not all about your performance on the floor or anything. So yeah, I don't know. Back to it. Long story short, I think your passion for it feeds everything. If you don't have that,
yeah, it's hard. And so it's really interesting, man, because like there's so many kids out there that are passionate about the marching arts, and we're drumline guys specifically with our backgrounds, and there's so many kids who are like in high school or like in an open class drum corps, like in a whatever group, and like they're passionate about it, but there's something missing. And like, I'm not talking about natural talent. I would argue, and again, I think you have so much natural talent. I was very blessed. I had a lot of natural proclivity towards playing in time, towards like rhythms, and like just the concepts around like what became drumline. But it takes a certain type of person to fully embrace drumline at the level that we did it. And that person has to be borderline crazy. Like, I think anyone that ever came around like me and you when we were like in design mode or whatever, and like me and Travis do this too, it's like you guys are always fighting, it's like, we're not fighting, dude. Like, we're fired up. Like, this is what we do. Like, this is like, I'm in the lab cooking up. You know what I mean? And like, I loved being a snare drummer because it was just like a grind. You're just like hammering a piece of iron and you're trying to like get it down to like this like perfectly smooth marble. And the process of doing that, if you can hang with that process to become like an excellent marching percussionist at the world-class level, like top level, like you won, I won, right? If you can do that, I don't think almost anything is harder to play that clean in a line. Like we were like kind of going down memory lane the other day in the car watching like Cavaliers 11 lots or like these lots or like those lots. And it's just like, dude, like you kind of mentioned earlier, not only is playing clean like the most amazing feeling, but how many groups have achieved that level? Like that real level of transparency, cohesiveness across all the sections, like is really almost impossible to do, I would argue. Like it takes a belief, right? A belief of something like you can't see, right? And there's passion, but there's also the willingness to like go in there and just go like, I'm gonna get beat up until like I have nothing left. And like, you know, it can get dark. It can feel like there's doubt or there's like hesitation or like you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. But like for me, like my answer to the question of like how did I ever even get anywhere was like how much fun we'd have doing that. Yeah. Right. Like I remember seeing you and T-Gas like 2012 Blue Coats finals day. Like I almost like enjoyed that better than like my own like age out was like seeing you guys on the field and you're like beating the shit out of each other, like literally physically like fighting on the field. And then in the reps, it was like you saw the fight in the drum line. Like you saw what you and Tom brought like from a personality standpoint. And like it takes a very like particular person to like meld the fun, the grind, the energy, the ass beating, the bulldog mentality. Because like, I'm sure you marched with people who were like, yeah, marching with Tommy was not always fun, but we were really good. And I think I probably fall under the same umbrella. It's like, dude, marching with him, like he was a fucking prick. Oh, also we won. You know what I mean? Or like, also we always ended in a certain place. Like that standard, right? But also like I would love to party as much as anyone. I love to like mess around as much as anyone in rehearsal, but then be a boss in the reps. You know what I mean? I think you come to it with this like very particular mindset that for me was always infectious. And maybe we're just like kind of like-minded in that way, where it's like, yo, I'm going to go ham. I'm going to stay up the latest. And there's also, I'm up earliest and then I'm working all day. And like, I feel like me and you, when we got to connect this together, we're like, yo, we know that like this is a good formula for us. Like this kind of works together. Like, and I think we figured out how to like make something really special happen, especially in 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Everything you're saying, dude, it's just like that is my cup of tea. Cause I've seen like a lot of different programs that have different approaches, and that with my programs, or I guess kind of my approach is exactly what you're describing, where maybe I clown around a little bit more than other people, right? Or maybe sometimes I'm a little more serious at these specific moments than other people, whatever. But I don't think you can have one or the other. And I think you're in a great place if you have both, because that's all you can ask for. You know what I mean? And like, you were talking about getting to that very top, like the finite, like all the way up there, and execution, clarity, those championship drum lines we know. I'm telling you, man, I've never seen any of those groups make it there without the passion and the fire. Yes. And like the goofing around and all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like you'd be surprised in that, like you see a drum line that's very technically flawless and consistent. You'd think like, man, all they do is exercises day in and like you would think that, but again, it's kind of like that saying, you've heard it before. People say like the students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's that similar kind of thing where like, you might be able to teach a snare line or clean them up a little bit further than you could before by like giving them that, Gatorade block. You stopped and got 10 Gatorades for everybody and brought them in, because it's about the big picture, like where you're headed. And like, especially for drum corps and like a 90-day thing or whatever, it's like, dude, you're going to go crazy if all you're doing is focusing on being serious and set and doing all that stuff. Now, I'm not trying to say those things don't work either. We have to have that, what do you call it? Like that program or like the exercise packet
process,
the process. Yeah. You have to have those things for sure. So like, if you're, goofing around all the time, of course you're not going to be productive. So, but yeah, I do think that's a really big part. And I'm a huge advocate for that. I think a lot of people that come into Kettering talk a lot about that, because it's even harder at the high school level, because you're not taking drum corps kids that want it, that pay for it, that really need it that bad in their life. Like they're choosing to be part of it. Right. And well, it's not all the way, but in high school, you know, you've got kids that want to be part of it, but like every year we get freshmen that have no idea what WGI is, you know what I mean? And so I would say that it's been a long process of a culture change. Like we've been working for year after year, teaching our kids how to have fun, but also like get serious when we need to. And it's never too much of one or the other, because if it does go too far on one side, the room is different. It's like weird. The atmosphere is kind of funny. People are like, something's wrong. But I do think it's super important that not only are your students getting there, but they're learning that that's an important balance. Like, hey, you can have fun too, you know. And I honestly, maybe I'm different than other directors, but like I'll stop rehearsals to talk about things that I think are super important that aren't related to working on our WGI indoor drumline show. Right. You know, like there are sometimes we have hard times where I'm on the floor, and while somebody or me or somebody's giving like a full ensemble comment, super important, I might have a staff member that's like maybe distracting or doing the wrong thing, talking to another member on the floor. And so his section or their section's not hearing it. And then I have to stop, and I'll use that as a moment where I've seen some groups like directors blow up on somebody and it goes south. You don't really learn from it. I get it. Maybe way back in the day, it was more like that. But I actually, instead of just saying like, hey guys, I'm talking, like I actually take moments to, you know, maybe it's a little more forward or like kind of awkward, but I take moments to explain, hey, this is why I'm saying you need to stop doing what you're doing. Like, I want to make sure you guys all understand that, like, we spend a lot of time, maybe we're having fun or maybe it gets a little bit loud, but we have to take it upon ourselves to like quiet the room down and get back to where we need to be. You know what I mean? And then taking those moments in real time to like talk about these things with your students, I think is huge. Like the kids need to learn how to be versatile in that way, and just like understanding that like sometimes you get better at playing those paradiddles by like talking about not paradiddles or not talking about paradiddles. You know what I mean? So yeah, hopefully that kind of answers your question. But
dude, I don't even care if you answer the question because it's all really great stuff. And dude, me personally, I sometimes feel like I'm not really even a music teacher. I feel like my effectiveness comes from training, mindset, focus, performance, the why behind things. Because like, you know, admittedly, like I'm not a well-rounded musician in that way. But I'm bringing something else that I think reaches the members because they're so used to just like, that was loud, that was soft, whatever. And it's like, nah, it's like, I know we're not playing well because there's a weird ass vibe between the three of you and the snare line. And we need to address that. Like I came into Crown this summer, dude, in the last 2 weeks, and I like stopped the snare line. I was like, there's a lot of stuff between you guys that's not being spoken about. And until you get it out, you're not going to play together. And they really didn't. There were reasons for that. I hold the adults accountable much more than I hold the members. I think that's something I've really learned just doing this for, you know, over 10 years on the educational side. Is like anything the members do, it's pretty much what the adults are doing. We can absolutely point to the behavior of the adults. And I think when you get into this as a tech or whatever, like when you enter, you're like, oh, I'm teaching music. Like, oh, here we go. That was dirty. Come in earlier, later. And like, I mean, I wish people were even as on point as that. But I think when you get to a certain level and especially a certain caliber of member, and I think Rhythm X is such an amazing example of this, is like, yo, if you're not coming correct, they're going to chew you and spit you out alive. If you come in with some bullshit or just some like, oh, like play late, like just like kind of not bringing yourself to it, not being like authentic, they will know. I think GMU this year is like a really good example of that too. Like we're finally at a point, and we've always had really great talent, but we're at a point with our members, like they'll check us. They'll check people. If you're just showing up and teaching the notes and you're not bringing preparation and love and passion and commitment and all those things that we ask the members to do, they flag that. Because how can you, and I really believe this, like, how can you believe that you're going to effectively coach members on a topic that you 100% are not abiding by yourself? Yeah. And that's been like helpful for me, is like when I try to make choices in my life or like in my professional life, or like, how I'm showing up to the group, like I know like there's a greater thing that's motivating me, which is like they will see it and know that I am bullshit. And like I never want that. I've been lucky. I've not had that as a major problem, but even at the high school level, they're getting more aware in certain areas, maybe less aware in others, but there's more transparency in total. And man, if you show up and you're just like, man, you guys suck. And they're like, hey, bro, like you kind of suck. You're like, oh, I fucking do. You know what I mean? Like they will know if you're not coming with that and bringing them something and bringing them along the way, doesn't work. You know what I mean? So it's like, it begs the question of like what the teaching is about. I see a lot of people teching, but I don't see a lot of people teaching out there, right? How many people can stand in front of a drum line and like flag the errors? Like millions. But how do I get the blue coats to play well for me? How do I do that? You know what I mean? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And I'm certainly interested in like step in front of a group like the Blue Coats or like a Rhythm X with the hot, students that are as good as we ever were. How do you get them to perform for you? How do you get them to believe in what you are doing?
Well, I think you said it best, man. It comes from our intentions too, like our preparation and like what we want out of it. And
sure,
God, I hate this so much because I hate talking about what I think. Like, what do I know? But I do think like what's going on with Kettering, for example, right now is a reflection of how much I feel for the program and what I want them to succeed with. And like the competition and all that, like it sounds so cliche, but like it really is not the focus, because what you're talking about is like the day-to-day experience, which is actually what we do here. Like if you think about the members' experience or your students' experience, like that experience doesn't just come from the competition at all. That's the smallest part. And it doesn't come from like shows or traveling or performances or events, because that's not that much either. That's only like however many weekends at the end of the year. But you spend all of your time in rehearsals. And if your rehearsals are like, let's say Monday is really engaging and then Wednesday is just super boring and super cold, and then Friday is super engaging, whatever, like that's not good for your students, because you're just changing their mindset and their passion for things. Where, again, I'm not bragging or anything, but like, I really do care about it a lot. And I come in every single day. You can ask the staff or anybody, like, I'm always super fired up about what the plan's going to be and what we're doing and how we approach the rehearsals. Again, it just comes down to my wish for the students, in that I just want them to have the best experience on the floor in rehearsals as possible. And again, it comes back to your passion. Like, I just don't think that happens if you're out there just like, hey, you're a little slow on the triplet roll. It's like, well, you're not talking about music. You're not talking about expression. You're not talking about attitude or energy. And that's another big part. I think you kind of talked about it a little bit, like that energy especially for like the Blue Coats drum line, that's the difference, right? Where you see like all these, just the most incredible percussion ensembles on the planet. But what I see different in different groups is that the passion, the performance, and the fire. And like at that level, you're not telling the kids to perform. You're not like, guys, you need to get into this, but you talk about the attitude and the expression that it takes, or what it feels to pump out that triplet roll at 192, or what it takes to play that ballad, rush stroke at like 120. There's just a different vibe and energy for everything. And I think it's important that your rehearsals and your teaching and instruction has that too. And I know it sounds super cliche, but you just got to ask yourself if you feel that way. Like when you're going in there to teach, it's like what you said. Are you practicing what you preach? You know what I mean? And again, there's so many different ways of doing things. Like I've seen some programs that maybe leave the passion and all that kind of stuff outside of it, and they still get fantastic results. So I'm not saying that you have to do it one way or another, but I definitely feel that it's more rewarding when every rehearsal feels energized, or every student feels like they're learning how to be passionate about something, right? Like that's what I feel like I'm teaching with the indoor drum line. Like I'm not teaching them to be the best Kettering that's ever been. Like I'm trying to teach them how to care about what they do at the highest level and what that means for the program after. So
dude, it's like everything we're talking about like is about the craft. It's not about the outcome, right? The craft of rudimental drumming, the craft of being on a team, the craft of being a musician. It makes me think about like having a plant, right? Where you need to till the soil, you need to water it properly and not overwater it. You need to put it in the sun. Like there's all these environmental things. There's all these like care things that the plant's not going to just grow. It is going to grow under very specific conditions, right? And I think that that's the kind of care you have to put into, like, I mean, really not only being a member, but as a teacher and an educator, that you are like responding to the environment. And I think, at least for me, and you know this pretty well, is like, dude, like I used to like dread going to rehearsal. I used to be angry because I couldn't figure out why the students were better. And then it was just like, I just didn't like it. I feel like there was a point where I was just like, this like sucks. Like I just not having fun with this. And then I don't know what happened, like age, you know, experience, like your brain matures and finds itself. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm the adult. Like I'm setting the tone. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be nice all the time, but it does mean that I'm investing in individuals who are going to be a reflection of what I do like forever. Like I'm not trying to have kids, but I have like hundreds of kids that I see go out in the old guard drum corps, in the other one, the West Point drum corps, like teaching DCI, like teaching independent world. Like these are students of mine that are in that, and you have the same thing. And you're like, whoa, okay, like something worked. And then like these other ones, like they didn't have it as much, they didn't want it. Like I leave that to them. I don't think everyone I teach needs to like do what I'm doing, because I sacrifice a lot. I did at some point just go like, I'm like raising these members to become someone. And if I've figured something out about how to get into adulthood, like somewhat bumplessly, like pretty well, like I'm doing okay, I should help them do that. Right. And I should help them like avoid the pitfalls that like I couldn't avoid, or that they don't have from like their parents or like their instructors who were just kind of like, you know, whether it be emotionless or like mean or like whatever, like that was very much drumline up to a certain point. It was just like, I'm just like bullying you to like play clean in a snare line. And like, I, you know, had, that can work. Like it's worked for me too. But, you know, we were texting and you were just like, the way you're going to get GMU to where you want them is to just like be, you know, bring yourself to it. And like, I've absolutely like, I think I've taken that on so much more, like, and you can see like, at least, you know, the outcomes have been so much better, whether it be the design, whether it be the clarity, whether it be the quality of the members we have, like putting that care into the individuals, because they're hearing what you're saying and they're seeing what you're doing. Right. And like that shit is so much more important than your ability to be like, you were slow, you're fast. Like, okay, like literally Chat GPT could clean a drum line. Right. But they can't make the blue coats who they are, because there's the personality behind it. Right. So it's really interesting, man. And I like, you know, I think, and I know, you know, this better than anyone, people think that teaching a group like the blue coats is easy. And it is not. It is not. How do you feel like your teaching has changed, kind of going back and forth from, the blue coats, the best drummers on the planet, to a high school and a middle school? Like how do those experiences inform each other for you?
Oh man, that is a great question, dude. Because I do think about that a lot. I really, really do. And I didn't think about that enough, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like when I first started teaching drum corps, I had never separated the two. When I was younger, dude, I was like hothead ego man, like, and I think maybe a lot of that came from, you know, teaching at the highest level or whatever with these kids that could play like that, and then going to high school, not really considering like, wait, hey, this is a kid that maybe his mom forced him to join band. You know what I mean? And I have, oh my gosh, I have learned a lot through that experience. And I guess inversely too, it helps me with drum corps because I'm like way more zoomed out. Like whenever I get, like last summer when I would get on the road with Blue and see everybody's in the grind doing their thing, I just see how like, guys, that triplet roll, the left hand every time, it's like you're repeating yourself. And that's part of it too, like where you're just reinforcing things. But I also, sometimes people are like a little taken off guard, like, you know, why is he so chill or whatever? Cause like, sometimes it doesn't need to be that serious. Like, at middle school or in high school, like when you're in the classroom, it's not that serious. You know what I mean? And like I was saying before, sometimes you can just take a step back and teach something by talking about something completely different, and you actually help. So I don't know. I'm not perfect. I don't have it figured out by any means. Like, I'm excited in the next 20, 30 years of doing this. Like, maybe I will even come closer to being way better at doing that. But juggling the two between teaching at that level or teaching at this level, like whatever, I will say it's an honor of a lifetime. Like, I'm really grateful to have that experience, although it can be very challenging or very frustrating because, you know, with high school kids, like, you're teaching them about that pressure, the pressure of like playing that 2-count tap roll flawlessly every time because your group, your score, whatever, all of it depends on that. Like, that's a hard thing to do, especially for high school kids. Like, dude, again, they might have been forced to join band, or maybe they just do it as a hobby, extracurricular, whatever. But yeah, it's a great place to be. And I would encourage like anybody to try to have that relationship like with themselves and their programs, and that, you know, teaching at two different places like that, it all just helps each other. For the high school, teaching at Bluecoats and then or drum corps anytime and coming here, it helps kind of lift the standard for the high school group, and it helps the kids kind of see like what you're getting into or where you come from. That's a huge one. Like, you know, I took a couple of years off from teaching drum corps, you know, trying to do my own thing and then maybe just investing in high school. And in those years off, I just kind of realized like not doing drum corps, like you could tell the kids, you know, hey, do it this way because the groups that I taught before or whatever, like that's only words. Like, it only means so much. But when they actually see you doing it and teaching and being there for those programs, like it really helps our standard. Like our group gets better because of groups too, you know. So there's pros and cons all over the place, but they're all so productive, like for me as a teacher or for the programs themselves, you know. So
yeah, I've got to think it's such a great point about the members seeing you sort of along the journey from the beginning to the end, right? Like to see someone even like Jordan Howard, who I taught with you at Kettering, finish his career at Crown is like, damn, dude, like it's pretty dope. You know what I mean? Like to have seen members go from the very beginning. You know, I taught Phil Andrews when he was like 15 years old or 14 or whatever he was at 7th Regiment. And now he, you know, is in the old guard. Is it the old guard? Yeah. He's in the old guard now. He taught all these world-class groups. And it's like, whoa, like, dude, what you're doing like matters. Like, it's not just playing clean and getting a score. Like, we have life-altering experiences, you know, gaining confidence in yourself. Like, I think that's one thing that I always felt like I earned, or I gained rather, from marching at the places I did, was like the confidence that I could do something that I was, you know, hoping I could do or complete, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to college. Well, to be honest, like it's pretty easy to graduate from college. Like it's really not. When you're like, I'm going to do this, you can do it. Just about anybody that wants to, right? But I don't think anyone can march season after season and get yourself in a position where you can step into the Bluecoats or the Cavaliers and like get a spot. And then you're there and you're like, what happens next? And you have to just keep going. And then once you get to that point where you're the focal point of this amazing moment in a show design, like Man in the Arena, for example, I'm just keep using that as an example because everyone knows about it. You like earn something, right? It's not the gold medal, but you've like earned like a self-confidence that you're going to take with you. No one's going to strip that from you. Doesn't matter what happens next. You're like, I've done this thing that was on me. I was the only bass 2 out there. I'm the only one. I'm like, even in a 10-man snare line, like you really are one of one, in my opinion, because everything rides on you showing up for each other. Right. So I love this idea of like being there for the long haul with a student, instead of just like catching them at the end and be like, yeah, I teach Bluecoats and they're fucking clean. It's like, no, there's like so much more behind it. So that being said, we could go on, and I think this is all really valuable. I want to get your opinion on sort of, you know, your perspective from as a bass drummer to a bass drummer, right? Like, and I'm like certainly interested in this because I have my opinions, but when you look at like bass drum culture and kind of where things are at and like where they've been, where they're going, like let's say I'm a student who's like trying to break into the DCI scene. I've marched a couple, I don't know, open class groups or cores or whatever. I want to make the Blue Devils. I want to make, it doesn't have to be Blue Coats, like solid bass lines with like top talent. Like for you, what makes a bass drummer ready and equipped to somewhat comfortably step into the ring in a group that's like a top 5 DCI or a top 5 WGI as a bass drummer? What do you think those qualities are for someone to make it?
Well, I don't think they're any different than any other section as far as like
Sure.
being prepared with, you know, your vocabulary, your technique, your approach, like all those things have to be realized, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be what those drum corps are looking for, like wherever you're auditioning for. Of course, you want to learn about that approach and you want to adapt to those things, but on a first time auditioning, you're not going to have those things figured out. So I think it's important that you approach every audition and every, you know, group you go to, like you've got to know what you're going for. You got to know what you're doing, what your intentions are, like, you know, what things do I have a grasp on, what things do I want to demonstrate. I also think, like, again, it's the same for all sections. Like your attitude is everything. The way you communicate is everything. You know, your preparation is everything. And again, coming back to it, your passion's everything. And I think making sure that people see how passionate you are about what it is you're going for, like that's a whole part of it. You know, I've seen kids that maybe didn't have as much talent make a group over somebody that maybe did because their attitude was better or their awareness socially was stronger, more intact. And, you know, there's a lot of different things that go for it. I don't think it's different than any other instrument, you know. I guess it is more challenging to prepare a bass drum audition because you've got to play with somebody else, right? So we already covered it. Like you talked about rudiments and like having your chops. Like you've got to make sure you're on a flat drum. If you're not like spending time doing any of this, like you're not really transferring anything to that drum, and that drum comes from a vertical drum. Like it's all the same. But I do think like being proactive in your studies is huge. Like how you practice with a metronome, like you can get really creative. Like, you know, the same thing, like you could take the quarter note, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then all of a sudden, and so, you know, I didn't change it, but like you put it in a different place. And so like being creative with how you practice and like just making sure you're prepared for like anything, you know, in my experience as a bass drummer, I always, in individual auditions, I always had to play unison stuff, or maybe it was like just that drum's part. But I can't remember ever like sitting on a drum with somebody, hey, try to split this. Oh, you can't split it, you're out. Like it wasn't really like on an individual audition standpoint. I guess going back into the room though, you've got to be ready to do that. You know, like we used to play this thing called the bucket game, and it was basically how many different splits can you hit in a row. And like you'd have to play with maybe a veteran of the drum line, and it was like, how many single splits can you hit at different tempos? How many 2s, 3s, 4s, or whatever variations can you play in what different tempos? You know, so I hope that doesn't sound like a stock, like generic type answer, but it is like specific in the way that you audition for bass drum and prepare for it. And it can be super challenging, especially for high school kids. Oh my gosh. But the flat drumming thing, like keeping your chops up is huge. And then just, you know, trying to find a partner or somebody to play with, or splitting the metronome, like all those things are going to be huge. And I guess if I ended it with one thing, you've got to know the packet. I mean, I know that sounds so easy, but like I watch kids come into auditions all the time, and it's not a good thing to say, oh, I haven't looked at this as much as I would have liked. And it's like, okay, well, that's your problem, but you definitely should have if you want to be a part of this group. You know what I mean? So
it's such a signal of what's to come. If someone is just like super blasé about their prep, I'm like, dude, we're going to get to July and I'm going to despise you. Like, I know exactly what kind of person you are. Like you thought you'd roll up in here and you're like, have some talent. And you marched like this group and you thought it was just going to like happen. Right. And yeah, I don't know why kids do say that, but they do. I also love the point you made about the consistency aspect, right? It's like, are you really a master of a skill if you can only just like do it once? Or are you a master of it if you can do it over and over? Like if I'm a shoe cobbler, I can't just like do one shoe and I'm like, oh, I'm good for the day. Like you need to be able to like produce results consistently. I think that's something that's not necessarily being taught or coached enough, in my opinion. At least just what I see, and like from groups, like teaching someone to turn their wrist and play a snare drum, or like, turn their wrist or rotate their arm, or like a kind of a little bit of both, like play bass drum or like whatever. Like that's all good and well. Like you can find that information online, but what about how you make yourself a machine so those mechanics are backed by, the software that's going to let them do what they're supposed to do? I think that is a little bit under the rug. And I think it's like a culture, like capital C culture thing, where it's like sometimes just repetition is the only way.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how do I get more consistent? You do it until you can't do it wrong, not until you can do it right.
Yep.
Bass drumming, in my opinion, is almost like, it's like almost more, because the size of the drums, the margin for error in bass drumming is so small. Like I know playing a clean triple roll on snare drums like extremely hard, but like to actually split sixth up with threes and make it sound like we talk about, like sounding like one person, like that is very, very difficult. And I think that consistency aspect, I don't know that people train themselves in the prep of the packet or what have you, where it's like, I cannot mess this up. Because then, when you see that person who's like, like facilities wise, man, but they are rock solid. And you're like, I know because where they're going to be in 3 months or in 8 months when you're auditioning someone. And I wanted to ask you about this kind of last on this subject, is just about relationship building. Do you find that you have prospective members reaching out, looking to connect with you and get an understanding of what the requirements are going to be? Do you feel like there's enough of that? Do you feel like there's too much of that? Because I kind of I can go both ways about like building relationship into an audition. Kind of, what are your thoughts on that? What have you sort of experienced in the last few years?
And this is like a student that is not a part of the group yet, that wants to be part of the group.
Yes.
There's like a really fine line, because I do think that it can be harmful, and it can come off as if you're doing it too much. You know what I mean? Like it says a lot about someone if they're reaching out too often and saying things like, say they ask you a question, what size drum do we use? And you say, 32, and they respond with like, oh my gosh, yeah, like that's exactly what I was hoping for. Like I really was hoping that maybe you could, and I'm really excited to show you what I've got, blah, blah, blah. Like now it's like, you didn't need to say that. And not everybody gets that opportunity to. Like, what about kids that aren't on social media, or they don't know the staff yet on social media, whatever. So I do think there's a part where it can be just harmful maybe, or too much. So you got to be careful that you're not coming across as fake. And I think that's where like the passion comes into it again. Like all these answers, I just feel like I could answer it with how passionate you are, because if you truly care about making the group, you really care about learning as a percussionist and like adapting and becoming a better version of yourself through that group, right? I always felt like that, I did care about making those teams. I really wanted to be a part of them. But if those people didn't think that I was ready or whatever, like that's their decision. Like I can't control that. And it doesn't matter how much like, schmoozing or like connecting you've done already, like it won't change that you're not ready. So I don't know. I didn't do any of it. I don't know if that answers your question, but like, I don't think I was messaging people a lot. I was lucky that somebody I marched with at Glassman was marching Rhythm X. They lost a performer, and then those through the like interpersonal connections, like because I knew them, we were friends already, they reached out, hey Tommy, could you come check it out? And then when I showed up, the only thing that I had was passion for drums. I was terrible. I had so much to learn, but I wasn't like schmoozing anybody, like trying to get the spot. And then, luckily I kind of stuck with my people too, which I think is just unrelated, but like, the people that I met at Rhythm X, there was a lot of them at Blue Coats and all that. So like, it was easy for me to just kind of follow suit. But yeah, I don't think you need to do it. I do think that if you have questions, like it's always great to ask, like you got to ask yourself, like, is this something that I can't answer right now? No. Okay. I should probably ask. But the networking that you're talking about, I think is more important in person when you're there at the camp, like how you mingle with the staff, how you interact with other people auditioning, like how you fit in. And sometimes not saying anything at all will say a lot. You know what I mean? So I think it's important that you consider like you're there to learn as a musician, and you're not there to like brown nose or schmooze anybody into getting something that you want. And I think the more you force it, the harder it gets at getting that position. So
yeah, we've seen it all. That's such a important point. Like if you're schmoozing to schmooze, we've seen it. We've seen people do that, and it's almost like a clear signal you're missing something that is substantial. If you're just like, blah, it's like, okay, you probably can't march.
How about when somebody does that? Like say you're teaching and then they ask you a question that's not relevant to what you're teaching. So all you can think about is like, I just watched you for the last 3 minutes while I was teaching a subject. You were thinking about this unrelated subject, waiting to answer your question. So then the teacher's sitting here thinking, well, you're not giving me my time. You know what I mean?
Yes. So. Oh man, couldn't agree more. And being able to gel with the members is to go back to multiple points ago. I've never seen a super good drum line where there was like personalities clashing violently. You have to love each other. You have to get along. So I think that's really important. And I do want to shout out our friend Kyle Miller. Thank you for quitting Rhythm X 2012 so that Tommy could come play bass 3. Well, I marched with him at Cavaliers. That's my dude though. That's my boy. Yeah, no, I'm not glad he quit because like he's not great, but I'm glad he did because it was fated for you to be that dude. So super dope callback. Yeah, you're like, who was that? But you already know. So last thing I do want to talk to you about, because I think your perspective on this is always excellent. 2023 WGI Independent World. Who have you seen? Who are you liking? I guess you don't need to talk about who you don't like, but we can just skip those. But like, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing just from like a cultural standpoint? We have an idea of kind of where everyone's at and where the waves are crashing. What are you seeing? What are you feeling?
Oh, wow. I've seen a handful of groups in person, like the Dayton, like local groups, Rhythm X.
Yeah.
Rhythm X, Redline, Connexus, Cap City, indie regional folks, Dayton. Yeah. I've seen them in person, and everybody else I've seen on videos, of course. I try to take everything I see on video with a grain of salt, just because you don't know how it actually sounds. Like you see people doing these like video, like commentary or podcast things, like talking about clarity and all that. I'm like, you just can't know. Like you don't.
Evan and Mike.
I didn't say that, but you don't know. And so, anyways, I've seen some groups on video and in person. Rhythm X is really, really strong. Of course, like I love that group, but I think their show Unspoken is like it's very, how do you say it? Like low key, it's very inventive and it's very fresh. It's very original, but in a very subtle way. It's not like in your face, like annoying with, there's not a lot of props. There's not a lot of that going on, but like the execution is like through the roof, and the nuance and subtlety in the designs are awesome. Like the whole Unspoken thing, the source material they use, the way that they use releases or not using releases, like that show's really cool, and it's grown on me. And the better they've gotten at it, the more I've liked it.
Yeah.
After that, like there's other groups like out in California, like Pulse is Pulse, like they always are, and they're fantastic at what they do. I think what's worth recognizing with Pulse is just how strong and consistent their program is. Like the choices they make, the preparation they have, the organization, all those details are there. So it's just I when I see that group, I can see all that behind the scenes. So it's just more enjoyable for me to watch. So I definitely think they're going to be way up there. I think Rhythm X is going to be way up there. Broken City is doing a lot of inventive things from an arrangement standpoint. I think like what their front ensemble and their drum line is doing, it's just, there's a lot of things I have not seen. Like the way that the front ensemble is arranged, but like all the tambourine stuff and the way that they incorporate the timpani and everything is like fantastic. But then the way that they complement each other with the drum line is even cooler. I think with, Roger and Mike's arrangements for the battery, it feels a little more aggressive for their style, which is awesome. Like they're playing like a 7-stroke rim shotted 7-stroke, like all rim shots. Like, they have the split rim shot thing going down. There's a part where they chaotically see, maybe I'm realizing in real time, maybe the rim shot thing is motific, whether it's together, diddled or whatever. The snare line's like sliding across the floor. I mean, like there's so many things that group is doing that I would say is a little more groundbreaking. Like there's a lot of things I haven't seen yet. I would, just based on the scores that I've seen, I would guess that they're maybe working through execution right now. I have no idea.
Definitely.
But yeah, they're super great. RCC is strong. You know, I don't know much about like their new team. Like I'm like an old head where I loved like the Sean Vega days and stuff.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I love RCC. So I don't want to paint this image that I don't like them anymore, but it's just different for me, like seeing that group and their new style. It is cool to see that they're sticking with it, whoever their new team is, like whatever they did last year and what they're doing now, like they have a clear direction for their identity, which I think is awesome. MCM's been kind of out there on their island. Like they haven't really competed against anybody yet. I don't know if that's like a logistical choice or if that's an intention or that's intended, like they did that on purpose. I don't know. But I do think their show is awesome. Like I think like the lights and stuff that they have along the back, those props are really, really cool. Their music arrangements, I think, are awesome from like a percussion ensemble standpoint. I think they have the most like variety and like just different timbres. The front ensemble's got like rototoms, they're tuning on the marimbas. Like the snare drums have like the vocoder thing going on the
Yep.
top. Like there's just so many things in that show that are super fresh. God, I hope I'm not missing somebody. Like then there's of course so many other teams that I'm just trying to keep up with. I do think it's like a dogfight right now, trying to get into like the top 15 spot. You know, I don't know what those numbers could look like. You know, there's that whole drum rank thing and everybody's looking at that. I don't think it means anything. I think it is good to kind of see where people are like mapped out in their class. I don't think it means anything for anybody's future. So everybody watching, you can calm down. The rankings.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. But I do think that, I don't know, we could see some new independent world groups in finals. Maybe not. I have no idea. Like the numbers are kind of saying all kinds of different things. And I think that's just a product of them not competing directly against each other. So we'll see where that goes. I think GMU is awesome. You know, I don't tell you that just because you work there or whatever, but I genuinely like watched that show. I saw it early season and I wasn't as interested. I didn't understand the concept as much yet. And the video quality kind of sucked. It was early season, whatever. But then seeing the latest video of it, it kind of reminds me of, I don't know what that show was, the cowboy show that you guys did like 2 years ago.
The Outlaw, yeah.
Yeah, The Outlaw was like, it was theatrical, but it was also super aggressive and it was like contemporary. There was like a lot of cool things that I haven't seen before. Like, and this show seems to be a lot of that genre too. Whereas last year was like kind of a little more minimal. This one feels super aggressive. I think your kids, like the members, are like really strong. It feels like the identity and the like the approach is like very realized. Like we were talking about teachers to their programs, right? Like when I see them, it feels like a very realized version of Dan and Travis. Like the kids are super about it. They're super passionate. They're super aggressive. The music is super cool. I think the concept of just like the hearing old music and all that, like it's inventive. I think it's really cool. So I'm excited to see where you guys end up. Of course, I'm always rooting for you guys to be up there. Infinity Percussion's got like all the white, they're doing that show with all the white and like the chalk and they're drawing. I think they're doing a lot of things really well. Like they have that epic long snare break, like things like that. I think are strong identity for them. Where they'll end up, I have no idea. So I don't know. I try not to look at the whole PIW thing as like a who's going to end up where, because I feel like it takes away from my just perception of the shows where I really just want to watch them and enjoy them for like what everybody's doing really well and what things they bring to the table. So that's a really hard question to answer, but hopefully I kind of got close to what you're looking for.
I mean, yeah, I'm interested in your opinion. I feel like when I look at independent world, and I just learn more about how things shake out, like trying to look ahead and have an understanding. Cause like, I'm like, we're going to win, but like, I also am growing and learning about where our organization's at versus others versus the politics involved in judging, which as much as the judging administration wants to say that there aren't any, there are, and I will give you plenty of examples of that occurring when we get off this recorded call. And I can tell you about the very real situations that benefited me, by the way, but they were politically driven benefits, right? So it's like, that's just all real. And those are contexts that if you ignore, you'll lose out and you won't recognize like where you are kind of at as an organization. I think there are a lot of teams with the ability to play well, but not with the ability to create innovative design. That's my takeaway right now. There's too much Mike Jackson biting. There's too many snare breaks ending like a Broken City snare break. There's too many compositional ideas or visual composition ideas that just feel like I am going like very specifically down this road. And it personally upsets me, to be honest. And it disappoints me with some of the arrangers that I do know. And I'm kind of like, where did you go? Right. Because you can't do what Mike and Kevin do. That's like their brand, and they do it in a way that's very particular. And also they have the horses to work through their clarity issues to the end. Right. And even receive credit where others groups can't, because the quality of their players is like as high as those other top four groups. So they can do something others just can't. And that just is what it is. I'm not going to like say that's right or wrong. It's just the reality of it. But man, I am like sick of like the snare break with the concert bass drum hits. Like I could name 5 independent world groups that probably will be in finals that they feel like they're following a trend instead of risking it all and doing something for themselves. And at least with, dude, I can only speak to Mason. I don't know why people do what they do. I mean, I kind of can project that, but like for us, the way we structure the show is very much pulling our identity to the forefront. Like, not only is it like the outlaw, it's also fringe, right? Because we do the hip hop thing, or we do, the super classical thing. The reason we do ballet is because everyone makes fun of drum lines for doing ballet, and that we don't actually do it. So we're actually doing it, right? And it's ironic, right? It's supposed to be ironic. It's supposed to, each of those modules that open is supposed to evoke a different emotion, right? Because what Eminem gives you is very different than what Waltz of the Flowers or Johnny B. Good gives you, but somehow together, it's meant ultimately to make you appreciate them for their differences. That how can music be so different and work within this like idiom? Because I would argue, as amazing as Broken City, Pulse, Rhythm X, RCC, Mystique, whatever team, they really carve out their identity and they stick in that identity in the show, right? It's very singular in terms of their focus, which works. That's great, because Broken City's very holistic in that way, where it feels like a single piece of music over 6.5 minutes. They like write really short shows, which is always impressive. We are trying to do more, and we're trying to bring all that personality out, and not be kind of like in a thread. Like I think last year was very like, we're trying to be in a singular thread and make it really focused in that way. And I think Rhythm X has taken a different approach, which I always respect X, because year to year, they're like, yo, we zig, we zag, we're doing something different. They challenge themselves as design teams. I think every design team at the independent world group, to succeed, you have to challenge yourself. Even though Mystique is Mystique, man, like last year they kind of did something different. I liked what they were going for. I don't know if they were totally happy with the end result, but I love that they were doing bluegrass, true to the Nashville area, true to their style. At least like the area style. It feels like they reeled it back in, but they do the MCM thing so well. Like, dude, their sound design, their lighting production, the uniforms, the costumes, and the training, they've got all that going for them. We are trying to do our thing. I'm not trying to be X. I love Tim and Andrew. I love what they do. All that stuff. I'm not trying to be RCC. We want to like carve out our own path. I think this is the only way you can break through, whether it be your placement, whether it be a fan base. Like, I don't want to succeed at this by being like someone else. Easier said than done. I don't know that I could tell every group what they should or should not be doing, but I just see a lot of groups kind of like following a formula that they think will work, and it just like doesn't, because they don't have the juice. They don't have the magic sauce that maybe the Mikes and Kevins or the Tim Andrews or whatever. It doesn't mean that they're not good. Like I see a lot of groups that are very, very good, but I just, man, and I'm so Jay, we work together, dude. I'm hard to please. I'm super critical.
In a great way, though. In a great way. Yeah.
I'd love to talk to any of those people, man. I mean, I'll tell them exactly what I think they're doing wrong, because I just think that at that top level, you can't just get in the tire treads of the person before you and expect it to, because it's all about the 28, right? Or for you guys, like how many Scholastic Open groups are there going to be? And you have to stand out through the composition of your design, the originality of the design, and the clarity. Probably especially the clarity for you all. That's going to differentiate you. Man, every independent world drum line, at least like the top 20, are going to be pretty good. The top 5, 6, 7 are going to be edged up with the talent they have, because it's like, how many DCI kids are there to go around? There's only a limited amount, but to stand out with your identity, I think is everything in the independent world realm. So for all the judges listening, I've just given you a perfectly sound argument for why you should put us up.
I wish I knew why, man. I do. Like, I know exactly what you're saying, especially snare features. Like, there's so many of them. It's like, well, I heard Bergen City or whoever do that like not too long ago. I don't know why people do that. Like, is it truly out of the safety of like guaranteeing a spot in finals or getting the credit or getting the points? Like, does it work for them? But I'll tell you this, man, like every time that we design together or when I work with our design team here at Kettering, like that is literally the last thing on my mind, if at all. Like, I don't ever, regardless of the classification of the program, like I don't ever think about like, well, what did this group do? Let's do that. In fact, I'll tell you this right now. When I hear something that sounds like something else I've heard, it needs to go. Like I will say something about like, that sounds like, that just sounds too familiar. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
I wish I could think of any of the staples. If the right hand at the gut edge and then filling in notes with the left. When I hear that, I'm just like, that can't, it's like copyright or whatever. Like you're taking from someone else's story and now you're not telling yours. I don't know. That's a great thought. You know, but I have noticed a little bit of that in DIW.
I got another good one. Bases, 5 spot, you know, base 3 in the middle, spinning, kneeling to both knees, like just like blindfolding, like these like little tricks that, you know, people have unveiled. And it's just like, I think maybe it's inspiration, and it's kind of like shitty for me to be like, don't be inspired by the greats, but it's like you're competing against them, right? Like you are literally trying to beat them, I would hope. Like, and man, I'm inspired by so many battery arrangers. Like I can't even imagine the amount of influence like in me or like you, right? Because we are like students of this, like Mike Mack, Paul Rennick, Colin McNutt, Tom Ungst, all Tom Rarick, like Roger Carter, Mike Jackson, like everyone. I've been studying this for decades, right? So when I sit down and write for my groups, I'm just writing what I feel is going to work for the group, what I think is cool, what I think works with the music. And the influence is like there, but it's like a, you know, it's like a bed, it's like a foundation of like how I even got to that point. It's not like, oh, like, dude, like Vanguard played like the Hockett shots and like, I'm going to play the Hockett shots. Yeah. Like, nah, like, dude, that shit is like so recycled, and it's like, do something else. And I feel that way with arrangers in themselves. I think people get to a point where they're like, nah, print, like they're just kind of like, I'm good. And like the people who keep challenging themselves, I think are the ones that we pay attention to, like, period. Like you are never done being surprised by what the Blue Devils are about to come out and do in their exposures. They always try something new.
Yeah.
Doesn't always work. Sometimes works, usually works. But man, like they always go for like, what has a snare drum never done? I love that mindset. Like that's what I think that level is about. Is just like trying something that you're experimenting. Can a triplet roll happen in rim shots? Thus far, it hasn't. It's dirty. But if they can make it work at the end, I'm talking about Bergen City again. If they can do that, that's going to be like, damn, that was wild. Like, didn't think that was going to be happening. It's that experimental mindset that just like, you can feel. That's Tim Jackson. Just like, I'm reinventing myself every time I sit down with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to like have that foresight or whatever to like kind of know, like right now, everyone's going to be freaking out. Like this isn't going to work or whatever. But you know that you'll get it there and it'll be really cool for sure.
Best lick ever written, 5-lit single partials without the last thing. No. Dude, I still get that. Yeah.
Well, now I see like Colin McNutt and who is it? Boston Crusaders, right? They kind of do like something similar. I think it's the left hand and right hand's on the spot. Yeah, that stuff's cool.
Nah, that's Tommy Rome original, bro. That's one of my for people who haven't checked it out, Connexus 2018. We all sleep on open class, I know, because I do too, but that was excellent book by Tommy. We collabed on the design choreo, and it's just a really solid program if you haven't checked it out. But that being said, we're almost at 2 hours here. We're rounding home. Wow. Yeah, it went fast, dude. And it's always just like a blast to check in. Like we're just great friends, and I just like respect the shit out of you, and I just love every time we talk. I'm like, I leave energized. I'm like exhausted because you like challenge my brain, and you're like, you're wrong, like their tuning is actually good. I'm like, oh shit, I'm not right about everything, and like I need that. Like I love that about you and about people that are like you. So dude, like super glad we did this. It was amazing. You're welcome back anytime, and I can't wait to see you in a couple weeks here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. Really, it was an honor to sit here and chat with you, and I look forward to doing it again if we can.
Oh, we will. So everyone, check out Kettering Fairmount High School. Check out their indoor drum line. Check out the Blue Coats. You already are. Check out GMU. All the shit that we're doing. Like, subscribe, leave a rating, do all the things you do on social media, share, etc. Always appreciate the listeners, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.